Welcome to Between the Lines, the sports betting podcast for DraftKings.com. I'm your host, Eric Rosendahl, and of course, as always, with me are Gary and Thorne.
Hey, guys.
And Will Appleby.
What up?
So a lot to talk about in the sports world. The British Open, I'm sure both of you saw all the craziness there. Will's already shaking his head. I think I know why.
Both of my bets, that stupid weather.
The weather was crazy. Rory McIlroy completely falls apart on day one. Tiger Woods misses the cut, which I had at plus 300. And Shane Lowry, of all people, runs away with the victory. Will, I guess, talk about what you saw in the British Open, some of the bets that you had, and just your reaction.
Well, I think one thing we could learn from this whole debacle that was the British Open as far as the weather goes is you really have to do your homework. You really need to know, like, if the weather is going to be awful, 30-mile-an-hour winds blowing all over the place. You're playing golf in a hurricane, you might want to be aware of that. So I had heard that Thursday's weather was going to be bad. I had no idea the wind was coming back on Sunday. So the wind took out Rory on Thursday and then finished me off and killed off Spieth on Sunday. So it was a weird tournament.
Yeah, golf is one of those sports where if you play at 8 in the morning, it's different than if you play at noon. Like, the weather is different. It affects the sport a lot, and I think people don't take that into account enough. They just talk about the quality of a golfer and how good he is and how he's playing coming into the tournament. It's like the weather does affect things a lot more than sometimes we talk about. Gary, what did you see in the Open? Did you have any Shane Lowry action? I know he was somewhere in the 60-1 range sometimes before the tournament.
Yeah, I didn't have any Lowry, unfortunately. I was mostly just following my couple of bets. The big one was Justin Thomas, who actually was, JT's one of those players who can really just go off for like a 7 or an 8 under on any given day. So he's always kind of in the hunt. And he started really well on day 3, which that was the half of the course he'd been having the most trouble with, was the front 9. He'd been crushing the back 9. So I think he comes out like 4 under off of the front 9 on day 3. And I'm thinking, oh, here we go. He's going to put up another like 4 under on the back 9. We're in business. We're all set up for the final group pairing or one of the final group pairings on day 4. And it all just falls apart. But like you guys were saying, it's really crucial to understand like all the secondary and tertiary factors that go into golf. I mean, other than baseball, it's really the only sport we ever have to worry about the weather and how those things impact the actual play. And it's not even just weather. It's like literally how the course is set up. The grass they use for the greens affects putting. Like it's crazy how deep some of the analytics go when it comes to gardening aspects in golf. Obviously, this stuff is way more important and a much bigger deal when it comes to links golf in Europe, where the weather is, historically and notably much worse than you get in like the Florida or California runs of a PGA season. But yeah, the weather wreaking havoc, not necessarily something we could foresee, but when it comes to golf in England and in Britain, that's always on the table.
Yeah, it's a great point for future reference for sure. Justin Rose, he fell apart in the 4th round, partly because of the weather, but I had him head-to-head versus Tiger, and I just can't believe how many people bet on Tiger Woods. I got a note from DraftKings earlier today that the most money in 2019 has been bet on Tiger Woods than any other golfer, and he's just not. Yeah, and that's why I bet against them. I had Rose against them, and I liked anybody else head-to-head against them. It took very few people lost to him this weekend or this week. So I'm going to keep betting against Tiger, and Will, tell me I'm wrong. I'm going to just keep betting against Tiger. I know you said it's because I hate America.
You may hate America, but you're not wrong.
I love America, but
two totally different things. Rooting against the soccer team and rooting against Tiger,
Well, I was rooting against him, just rooting for ties. Everyone loves a good tie.
Hey, speaking of ties, I'm not going to get into the soccer matches today, but I saw there's 3 big soccer matches that are going on, and I looked at the handle, the money percentages bet on each team, and the amount on the games being a tie were 1%, 0%, and 1% on the 3 games. Nobody likes to bet ties. I love to bet ties. I figure
we'll wrap this episode up real early so you can run out and bet as many ties as your little heart desires, my friend.
I'm excited.
Hey, if it's NFL ties, I wholeheartedly support betting NFL ties. I love NFL ties.
that's a thing now. We're gonna get into some NFL because the freaking preseason is almost here on August 1st, which is mind blowing. But just so you know, Rory's the favorite again next week in the FedEx St. Jude Invitational. I don't know if there's any.
I honestly thought he was going to win. Like if he made it to the cut, he was one hole short. Honestly, like he's going to come back with winning.
I mean, he had a great run
through the second round. He ripped through
the second round was fantastic. Really, it was only 2 holes. Wasn't it the first and the 18th that really just sank him?
Yeah, he started with what was it, a quadruple bogey, I think,
and ended with the triple. And I think he finished +8. He would have been +1.
Yeah.
And that really is what sank it. But Shane Lowry was so dominant. You never know who can win these tournaments. And he played beautiful golf.
I mean, Finau finished third at 7 under. So I know McIlroy would have made the top 5. Whether or not he would have won is probably another question. But
yeah,
I mean,
maybe he gets
it was
right.
Definitely the weather that kept him from out of the top 5.
Maybe he gets right this week at +1,000. Maybe it makes sense to take Rory at 10-1. Hey, wins the tournament, makes up for what just happened a little bit. Had a couple extra days off.
We love the revenge narrative, so there you go.
Revenge narrative in golf it is. All right. Well, let's get to baseball. I wanted to see where we're at in the season, thoughts on divisions, awards. I know, Gary, you had one division that you wanted to talk about that you thought was the most interesting.
Yeah, I really wanted to talk about the American League Central. One, because as you mentioned, there's really not a lot of interesting division talk to have in baseball. It's the AL Central and the NL Central, and I'm sure Will's got some thoughts on the NL Central, so I'll leave that for him. But the American League Central is getting really interesting. It seemed early in the season that the Twins were running away with this thing. They had at one point a double-digit games lead over the Indians. They've closed that gap down to 3, although if you're looking to bet on the Twins still, they're more than 5-1 to still take down the Central. The Indians right now are +325, 3 games back. And I'm not necessarily suggesting to bet on Cleveland, although I do think there's some value there. But one thing I really wanted to hammer home, and this is a point I made when we were talking about like Jose Barrios possibly taking home the American League Cy Young, Minnesota's schedule gets so easy as soon as they're done this series with the Yankees. They've got 2 more games against the Yankees left. And after that, they have 61 games left. 36 of those 61 games, that's over 60% of their schedule, is Detroit, Kansas City, the White Sox, or the Miami Marlins. They have 10 games left with Cleveland, and 7 of those 10 are in Minnesota. So they have the home field advantage for those 10 games as well, even though that's still a large cluster of games Cleveland has head-to-head to get back in this thing. But there's a very good chance that Minnesota loses the next 2 games to the Yankees because, look, the Yankees are probably the best team in the American League. There's also a very good chance that the Indians win their next 2 games against the lowly Blue Jays. So by Thursday morning, we could have a situation where Cleveland is 1 game back of Minnesota. If the odds shift drastically enough where you can get like Minnesota at, -200, -225, something in that realm, I think that's good enough value for me to hop back on Minnesota and really pound them to win the division because, again, their schedule gets so easy that they're going to end up pulling away again. And I really do believe they still take down this division. Even with like Corey Kluber set to come back in mid-August. I understand he threw a bullpen last week on Wednesday. That's fine. But Kluber didn't even really look like himself prior to this injury. I don't know what form of Corey Kluber we're going to get when he comes back after a 4-month absence. So mainly I just wanted to make the point that if this does end up getting close, scheduling really favors the Twins still. So if you can find value on them within the next week, I would really suggest hopping on that.
That's all fantastic information. And you spoke to it to the extreme degree that I always like to say with futures is wait till there's a situation where a team you like is going to have an easy schedule. Maybe a team you don't is going to have a hard one. And I mean, 59% of your games after this Yankees series against those lowly, Marlins, White Sox, Tigers, and who?
And the Royals.
And the Royals. I mean, that's just a joke of a schedule. And 7 out of 10 of their games against Cleveland being at home is a big advantage too. That's the only realistic team that's chasing them. I love all those stats. I'm going to be really rooting for the Twins to go down these next 2 games, hope the Indians win. And then I think you maybe get the best value all season at that spot right before the Twins go on a run. Because, people always talk about teams that are hot, teams that are cold. I think it's more about who you play. Like, if you go against Justin Verlander, on the road tomorrow and your team scores 1 or 2 runs and loses, you're considered cold. But if you get to face my guy, Dylan Covey, who's pitching today, who might get lit up, I like the over in that game. Then all of a sudden you're at home, and now all of a sudden your team's great and looking sharp. So I think that's all mostly nonsense in general. It's about who you play, who you're facing, and let the Twins lose now and then bet on them to win the division, just like Garion said, when they're going to get an easy schedule. Will, are you in? Do you see any similarities with the Cubs or anybody else in the NL Central?
Well, a little of both. I mean, I think the general consensus, like with the public, is that Cleveland's going to overtake Minnesota. Like, everybody just assumes that. And I think maybe, you talked about it right there. Like, that's the place to take advantage and just let the public waste their money on the Indians and go after the Twins. There's a similar situation developing with the Cubs. The Cubs are on a long road trip at the moment, like 9 or 10 games, starting in San Francisco, but then they're going to Milwaukee and to St. Louis, the 2 teams that are behind them right now. And the Cubs' record on the road has been horrendous compared to at home, like well below 500. And so there's a very realistic chance, 10 days from now, the Cubs might be in third place. But I mean, I'm a fan. Don't get me wrong. Like, I'm biased in that sense, but I still feel like the Cubs are the best team in the division. So there may be a chance, in a week or so, you wake up and see the Cubs in third place. You can bet on them to win the division there, because right now they're only plus 110. You would think, especially if they drop, those odds would improve.
Yeah, again, just another situation where if they're on a 10-game road trip, you can't expect them to win 7 of those 10 games. You expect them to maybe fall back a little. Hopefully one of those other teams plays well, and you can get the Cubs at a better price when their schedule gets easier / more home favored. I think there's both smart ways to bet. Really the only 2 divisions in baseball that make any sense. Garen, what was the stat you had about the Dodgers odds?
Yeah, I mean, we're essentially reaching like number 1 seed in the round of 64 with the Dodgers. It's not even a price you can bet. It's not listed at the DK Sportsbook. You can take a shot with like the Diamondbacks. I think they're like 55-1 or something like that. But yeah, the Dodgers.
I think that pretty much solidifies Bellinger's MVP.
I mean, that's it is interesting if we go to the awards. Like, it's kind of crazy how like a 20 plate appearance run can swing the odds for National League MVP right now, because that's how close these 2 guys are in the minds of the public. But I still think all the outside factors favor Bellinger, like Will was alluding to. Like, you've got the Dodgers a lock to not only make the playoffs and not only win their division, but arguably win like 107, 110 games this year. Like, that's just a massive number for the voting public. And then you've also got, as we've talked about a lot, not to keep hammering this point home, but voter fatigue. Like, I really do think you have to be Herculean to win back-to-back MVP awards. So if it really comes down to splitting hairs, I think you're going to find a lot of voters are willing to say, well, Bellinger had arguably as good a season. His team was better, and he didn't win this last year. It's fresh blood. So I think getting Bellinger at plus 105 is still relatively nice value, especially considering if we go to the American League, I think Mike Trout is now minus like 560 or something crazy like that. Like, there's almost no point in betting anyone else in the American League. So to still be able to find some value on Bellinger is kind of interesting.
Yeah, in the AL, you're basically betting that Mike Trout's going to get hurt. Bregman and DJ LeMahieu were the second biggest favorites at 10-1 each. Mike Trout has basically won that award minus 560. Is just too high of a price to pay when his team probably won't make the playoffs, and you never know about injury. So I'd stay away from that. But in general, it's his award to win. I'm happy taking.
They're only 5 games out of the playoffs, though. They're not that far out.
They're not that far, but they got a lot of teams to pass. I'd be really surprised if the Angels do make it in the end. It'd be a nice story. I hope it'd be nice to have Mike Trout, the best player in baseball, maybe the best player ever. A lot of people think in baseball, to see him in the playoffs, but to me, it doesn't look like it's going to happen. But back to the NL MVP, I'm happy taking Bellinger now. Him and They're both plus 105, him and Yelich. So it's basically 50-50. Everybody else is 18-1 or more. I've gotten a lot of Yelich prices at much higher. I think I got him at, was it 18-1 before the season? He's at 20-1 at his highest point, and I bet it at plus money multiple times. So I think I'm actually kind of happy to hedge with Bellinger a little bit, plus 105. I think all of Gary and your points are correct about voter fatigue a little bit, and if it's close, it's going to go to the guy whose team is in first place and running away with the division and running away with, World Series favorite crown going into the playoffs most likely. So I'm happy to hedge on that, and I actually would pick Bellinger straight up right now if I had to pick one of the two guys. So I'm in on that. Will, are you taking Bellinger with us?
Oh, I'm wholeheartedly on Bellinger. Yelich has no shot. Like, I don't know why he's even no shot. I don't know why he's 50-50. They're in third place. You've got Bellinger and the Dodgers running. Granted, I don't think they'll stay in third place, to be fair. I think at worst they finish second. But for him to have any chance they're going to win the division, they're going to have to win the division, And I don't think they're going to win the division. I think the Cubs are. So in my mind, it's Bellinger or nothing, which is why I think Bellinger at plus money, you better do it now. Because, like Gary said, that could turn into minus 560 pretty damn fast.
So I got a question for both of you guys. Of the 10 games yesterday on Monday, how many of them went over, do you think, and how many of them went under of 10 baseball games?
I'll go 2.
Two over. Say
Two
a
over.
lot of them went over. I feel like there was some really bad pitching last night. Let's say 9.
Garion, you are the closest Price is Right style. It is actually 10 out of 10 games went over yesterday.
Went over. Wow.
Which is just absolutely unbelievable. Statistically, the chances of that are astronomical. I don't know if it's something about baseballs being juiced. We had that conversation last week, or bullpen just falling apart. Maybe it's the heat. Do you see any sign of things changing where we are seeing 10 games out of 10 go over? Maybe it's the juice baseballs. Maybe it's the heat. Just random variance right there.
I think part of this obviously is runs are up across the board this season. Home runs are up across the board. That has a lot to do with the juice baseballs. But really, this goes back to the other, I would say, much more pressing issue baseball has, which is just some teams' reluctance to spend money in free agency this offseason. If you play DFS baseball on a daily basis, you will notice, much like I have, that we run into slates where there are just gas can pitcher after gas can pitcher after gas can pitcher. There are just so many guys starting games who should still be in AAA or who should be a long man in the bullpen. Like, many teams, like upwards of 10 to 12 teams, just don't have enough starting pitchers to round out even like 4 slots in their rotation. So you run into these issues where guys who just shouldn't be pitching at this level are. And I think in combination with the heat wave across the East Coast, the mugginess too, that helps the baseballs fly, plus whatever's going on with the baseballs themselves, it really has led to some of these nights. But like you were saying, a lot of this also just has to do with particular slates, and just not having aces go on a Monday night where only 10 games are being played, not 15. So there's some random variance in here too, but I think it's just the quality and caliber of pitching across the board has been weaker this season.
Yeah, it's been way down. One of those guys is pitching tonight, in Dylan Covey. He's got an xFIP of 6.12. One of my least favorite pitchers in all of baseball. I'm sorry, Dylan Covey, if you're listening. I doubt you are, but
he's your baseball Eric Bledsoe, apparently.
He's my baseball Eric Bledsoe, and it's got nothing against the guy. I just don't think he's that good at pitching against the best people at hitting in the entire world. 6.12 xFIP, as I said. He's gotten a little lucky this season. I'm looking to bet the over on that game, Marlins at White Sox, because I think it's going to be just like yesterday, where two guys can't really get outs, even though the batters they're facing might not be.
Hey. Ivan Nova, first complete game in 2 years. He pitched well. It's just, you can't really see those Ryan Goins home runs coming. They really sneak up on you. So
yeah, exactly. I think that might have been the difference in the over-under as well. Goins.
Old Ryan Goins.
Yeah.
My Eric Bledsoe.
That's your Eric Bledsoe? But Caleb Smith pitching against Kobe today, I see a lot of runs being scored. So if you're in the DFS world on DraftKings playing daily fantasy baseball, I like just stacking batters, especially for cheap today, but also just in the betting world. I'm on over 9.5. It's going to be one of my best bets Will, is there anything else in the today in baseball that you like, or any theories that you want to go with?
What's interesting is we were talking about all these overs, and I'm actually betting an under in my bets in the Cubs Giants game, because it's Darvish against Mad Bum. So, and Darvish has actually been pitching like good Yu Darvish, not like World Series Yu Darvish. So, he's shut out both his last. Well, he didn't make it all the way through the game. He's thrown like 6 or 7 shutout innings in his last two starts. There's a over and under of 7.5, I think it is, for the Cubs and Giants. I think that's going to be like a 3-2 type game. So I'm going under there. But I like Yelich to homer. He's at home. I just said he had no chance to win the MVP, but when he's at home, he does nothing but hit home runs. So he's facing Tanner Roark. He's got 2 career home runs off of him. Guys like Donaldson, facing a lefty in Atlanta with the wind blowing out. He's been hot. There's another guy. There's some interesting spots, but despite all the run scoring, I don't think there's going to be many in San Francisco tonight, but we'll see.
Yeah, there's a lot of home run props in the DK Sportsbook. A million things to bet on every baseball game. There's one thing called the Californication Parlay. It's going to be my best bet. Don't blame me. That's the name and the official name of the DK Sportsbook. So I'm going to be putting a little money.
Dare I even ask? I guess I'll find out.
Yeah, you'll find out. You mentioned Mad Bum. I wanted to ask you, Gary, and the Giants are making an all-time incredible run. I tweeted that even as a Dodgers fan, I finally had to admit it. They're making an incredible run towards the playoffs. It's been kind of magical since the All-Star break. Do you see them keeping Mad Bum and crew and trying to make a run? They're still plus 1,000, I think, to make the wild card in the NL. Or do you see them, caving in and trading these guys and realizing that, hey, we are plus 1,000 for a reason. It's been a great story, but ship these guys out and build for the future?
I think they'd be smart to probably do that, but it's become such a feel-good story that I think they probably have to just see this one through. I mean, Bumgarner is such a weird case. Like, he feels like he's 37 years old because he's been around forever and thrown so many innings, but he's only 29. Like, wow. Realistically, you could still hang on to this guy, sign him to another contract down the road, and it wouldn't be that frowned upon. And I think the important thing to factor in as it pertains to tonight, especially with Bumgarner, it's one of the reasons I can back up Will for liking this under, is he has just been phenomenal at home going back to the start of May. I think he's got a 2.65 ERA, 2.45 ERA actually, 2.85 FIP. His strikeout rate is up over 27%. His opponent, Woba, is down at 251. He's been magical at Oracle Park. And one of the big reasons is he's suddenly just sort of himself again. Like, there was this weird trend he had the last couple seasons, and it even continued coming into April of 2019, where he had just lost all the velocity on his cut fastball, arguably his most important pitch. It's the one he uses most often, especially to right-handed batters. It was down below 86 miles per hour to start the season. And then magically again on May 1st, since that point, and we've now got a sample of about 15 starts to draw from, it's up over 80.5 miles per hour, the fastest it's been in 5 years. So I'm not necessarily saying he's like vintage Mad Bum, but the stats kind of back it up. So, I mean, tonight specifically, like I said, I was looking for ways to like bet Bumgarner. The way I chose was to take the Giants at plus money at home. I mean, they're really even money. They're plus 100. But betting the under, I think, is also a really good way to go about this. If you want to bet the under for both team totals, they're both 3.5. Like, I think taking the Cubs under 3.5 is a nice way to go. But really, you're just finding ways to bet on Bumgarner right now when he's in San Francisco, because the results just kind of speak for themselves.
Yeah, and he knows that any start could be his last start there. So I think, he had a amazing performance when we saw that before. He thought it might be his last start, and now this could be, or maybe this weekend I actually know somebody, shout out Ike, that's going to road trip up to San Francisco just to watch him pitch. That's how big of a legend he is there in San Francisco. They love the guy there. Last thought is, I mentioned this, is what about trading him, getting some picks and all that, and signing him again in the offseason? Are you on board with that, Will?
Sure. Why not? I'm all about gaming the system.
They should trade him to the Dodgers, take a bunch of draft.
Oh, that's your angle. Okay.
Bunch of young prospects, If
there it is.
Young
comes out. I see it. Okay.
Do you think he could physically pitch in a Dodgers uniform? I don't know if that would actually work.
I remember when Johnny Damon.
I don't know, man. I think that's a different level of hatred, though. Like Johnny Damon's a pretty easygoing guy. He came up as a Kansas City Royal. Like it wasn't like he was born into this Red Sox hate system of the Yankees. Madison Bumgarner has spent 13 years of his life hating the Dodgers. I don't know if he could pitch for the Dodgers, man. He'd go all Chris Sale and start cutting up jerseys.
I want to see it. I want it to happen.
I'm here for that. Let's go.
Yeah, maybe Chris Sale. He's starting again. I think minus 175. Is he going to start cutting up jerseys? What's wrong with Chris Sale? Where's the Chris Sale of old? We need him to do that again.
I mean, if you look at maybe. If you look at the underlying numbers, though, like he's still kind of the same guy. Like his xFIP is below 3. He had a great start his last time out against the Blue Jays. He's just kind of run into some bad cluster luck, really. Like he'll have starts where he only allows 5 or 6 hits. It just happens that 3 or 4 of those come in the same inning. Like I just think he's been incredibly unlucky this season. He hasn't gotten any run support. I know even looking at AL Cy Young odds, he was like 11-1, and that in and of itself seems crazy. But then you kind of remember, I can't even think of the last time a 4-9 pitcher could ever be considered a Cy Young candidate. And look, I don't think records are important, but people who vote on these things do. So I kind of understand it. But I like him a lot tonight against Tampa. I almost had Boston money line as one of my best bets. It didn't quite make it. There were some games I liked a little bit better, but I got no problem betting on Sale tonight.
Yeah, me too. And if you could give me 11-1 on who's going to be the best pitcher the rest of the year, I would love that on Sale. But the fact is, he is 4-9. The stats are the stats. Even if they're unlucky, they are what are there. And it doesn't matter, so I don't like him at any shot to win the Cy Young. But if you could give me who will be the best pitcher the rest of the year, there's a very good chance it's him. You mentioned cluster luck. I wonder if xFIP is considering anything like the juiced balls that we may have in Major League Baseball. I don't think some of these numbers can account for that.
I mean, it's xFIP. If there was ever a sabermetric stat that would account for that, because xFIP really does weight the amount of home runs a pitcher has been allowing and tries to normalize that. So of all the stats, xFIP would be the best to kind of involve the juiced baseballs. But
my point would be that it's regressing it to a mean that maybe doesn't exist, that it is just going to be higher now for everybody. Because of how the baseballs are, you're going to give up more home runs, and it's
which what I'm saying, like going forward, you might have a point where it's possible that xFIP becomes the more reliable stat versus FIP, which doesn't as heavily weight home runs and things of that nature. So, it's a good point.
All right, let's head to. I cannot believe it's finally almost here. The king of sports betting and sports, and I'm just excited to have it here. NFL. August 1st, we have our first game we can bet on, preseason football. I wanted to ask you guys your first thoughts on preseason football, if you bet it, if you have any strategies, because I do. I think it's some of the best, somehow it's some of the best time to bet on football all year long. And I wanted to hear from either of you first. I guess, Will, do you bet on preseason football, and what are your thoughts on it?
I don't typically, but I mean, I'm so football thirsty right now, I probably will. I'd watch the fifth stringers of anybody play right now, so I'm ready. I'm ready to bet on the future waiver wire guys. Let's go.
Garen, are you excited to bet on a bunch of players you've barely ever heard of, or quarterbacks who are seventh string?
Not really. Look, I'll say this: I do understand where the edge can be found in preseason football, and I really respect the guys who do it well. Like if you're one of those guys, Eric. Power to you, man.
But if you're going to do it, you better do it well, because if you don't do it well, you're going to flame hard.
But like Adam Levitan is fantastic at not only betting preseason football, but also finding some of the inconsistencies to play NFL DFS for the preseason, which is another thing that my mind really can't wrap itself around. But I mean, I can get behind the thought process that it's truly about knowing an entire, 95-man roster essentially for the first couple of games at the very least. So if you're someone who's really in the weeds of this stuff, if you're someone who's a college football fan and knows the tendencies and knows the abilities of some of these guys who a lot of people haven't heard of, I can understand being excited to maybe find an edge.
Yeah, I think a lot of what there is to do in NFL preseason, and some of these guys dive. You mentioned Levitan, just dive crazy deep into each and every player. I like to bet on news in reaction to like what coaches are going to do. A lot of times you'll hear a coach is going to play his starters. One coach is going to play his starters the first quarter. The other coach is going to play his starters the full first half. And the market doesn't quick enough react to that. So I think the way to really bet the preseason is knowing which team's going to play their better players against other teams, because that matters a lot more than the quality of the team. Two teams who went 0-16, the Browns and the Lions, if you remember.
Went undefeated in the preseason. Yeah.
Yep, both 4-0 in the preseason, undefeated. So the quality of the team overall is pretty meaningless. It's all about how much they care in the preseason, how long they're going to play their better players. Obviously, the quality of their backups and just everybody does matter. That's, I guess, the only thing that matters is who's playing. But that'd be my point, is a lot of teams have their backups playing against starters, and you can just crush it, whether it's live betting in the DK Sportsbook, quarters betting, first half. A lot of times you can take an advantage there, like I mentioned before. And there's very few ties in preseason betting because teams go for two at the end. So you see a lot of weird lines about like +1.5, +2.5, because teams don't try to win and go to overtime, win by a field goal. But there's actually a way to take advantage.
Because nobody wants overtime preseason football. So.
And exactly. So I can't bet ties like my soccer bets. But that actually becomes some value because of that. And it's called a Wong teaser. We can get more into it next week when there actually is lines to bet on and see if any of them are available. There's a lot of Wong teasers available in NFL preseason betting where you can take teams who are +1.5, +2, +2.5, around that range, and tease them with the second team to get them both up over +7.5. And when you do that, there's a lot of value created there. So we can get more into those next week, but preseason football with low totals, you're going to see some shockingly low totals, sometimes in the 30s, and lower spreads, where you can get a teaser that has, really good return, really good value on it. So I'll be looking forward to spitting some of those out for you on next week's show. But any final thoughts, Gary, on preseason NFL betting and how much of it you're going to do?
I mean, look, I'm open to trying new things. So maybe I'll put a couple Wong teasers together next week. But like you said, we'll cross that bridge when we get to it.
Yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited to get there. We're going to be talking betting way too much preseason football, and I'm excited for it. Remember to follow us on Twitter @BetweenLinesDK, and if you're listening to us on audio on iTunes or Spotify or anywhere else you get your podcasts, we're also on YouTube. You can come watch our beautiful faces there on YouTube or on DK Live. Follow DK Live on Twitter as well, @DK Live, and follow Gary and Will too. They got great Twitter accounts. So I wanted to talk about UFC. Last week, interesting mixed bag. We saw Greg Hardy. I famously picked Greg Hardy to lose, and he...
How'd that work out for you?
Say it again?
I said, how'd that work out for you?
It did not work out well. But luckily that wasn't one of my best bets. Leon Edwards did come through, the one bet I actually felt strong about.
Didn't he lose extremely quickly too?
Yeah. Oh, it was just a total disaster. Hardy just completely beat him down. I think the UFC put him against somebody who had no business being in the ring. Even though I don't think Greg Hardy has business being there either, especially on a big night like that. But hey, it is what it is. So I want to get to UFC 240. Got some information on that. It's a co-main event. Chris Cyborg is fighting Felicia Spencer. Spencer is 7-0. Said she's excited to shock the world and win this fight at +425. Cyborg, who you may know as maybe one of the best female fighters of all time, she's -625. She, lost to Amanda Nunes. Before that, she was at the top of her game. Everything points to Cyborg just winning this fight. Nothing really points to Spencer, but anything can happen in one fight. And actually, a little money maybe on Spencer at +425. So I'm going to take a shot. Do either of you have any thoughts on Cyborg versus Spencer, or the co-main event Holloway versus Frankie Edgar? Because I'm going to get into that next.
My thoughts are listen to Eric. Eric knows. Those are my thoughts.
Yeah. I mean, I will say, in my limited experience watching women's UFC and women's MMA, I think you're right in the sense that those fights can seemingly turn on a dime. Like there was a long stretch where a lot of these like title fights weren't even lasting more than like 2-3 minutes. So anything can happen in a fight that short. So there's always a little bit of intrigue in taking an underdog, but I'm kind of shocked it's only plus 425. The way you were talking about it, I was thinking maybe you could get like plus 600, plus 700 value on it. So it might not be enough juice for me to bet against Cyborg. But again, you are far more qualified to talk about this than I am. So we'll get to the co-main event here.
Yeah, well, we've been killing it with some of these UFC bets. You know, you never know in a fight, one punch, one submission, one takedown in UFC, everything can change. I just think a lot of the public knows Cyborg. That's where they're betting their money. I think that's why she's favored so strongly. And I really think Spencer, she's 7-0. She should be the underdog. I would predict her to lose straight up, you know, every single time. But I think there's some value there that, you know, 1 out of 3, 1 out of 4 times she could win this fight. And if that's the case, you bet that every time. And when it comes through, I mean, we saw it with Thiago Santos against John Jones. He didn't win. He was around the same price, plus 425. Didn't win, but you keep making smart bets like those, and they're close, and one of them is going to come through, and you're going to win money eventually in the long run, in my opinion. So I say stay away from Cyborg. She probably will win at minus 625, but hey, you might have a better opinion than me. Maybe you knew Greg Hardy was going to take down that fight pretty easily on Saturday. So, you know, bet with what you know. A co-main event, Max Holloway against Frankie Edgar. Max Holloway's minus 400. Edgar is plus 300. To me, I see this line should be much higher. And I know a lot of people like Edgar, but he's 37. Max Holloway is 27. Frankie Edgar is 5'6". Max Holloway is 5'11". I just think this is a complete mismatch where a lot of people like Edgar. He's a fighter that he's strong, and he's has a great camp, and he's been there for a long time. But I just think this is a total mismatch of height and age, where being 10 years somebody's senior in UFC is just really hard to overcome, especially at that height disadvantage. So I'm all in on Max Holloway minus 400. I don't know if you guys have any thoughts on Holloway versus Edgar at all.
I mean, this from a narrative perspective, the picture you paint sounds familiar. Like we've seen this before in UFC, sort of the much heralded veteran fighter who's probably getting his last crack at like a co-main event. Like we've seen this a lot, whether it's Anderson Silva or just a lot of times. Like this narrative tends to present itself quite a bit. And I don't know. I think that, like you said, this guy's younger. He's got a reach advantage. It seemed to all make sense to me. So I wouldn't be opposed to following you on this one.
Yeah, the reach is actually surprisingly pretty close, but the height is just gigantic with 5 inches, and just being 10 years younger, it makes a big difference in being in your prime versus being on your way out. And look, I'm sure Edgar's going to do his best. Obviously, in any fight situation you are, but I think it's going to be too much for him to overcome. And I think the lines are kind of flipped. I think Holloway should be closer to minus 625, and Edgar on this fight should be closer to plus 425. So I'm going to take that bet. I'm going to be very, very heavily interested in watching, because I think I'm very heavily monetarily involved with Max Holloway on this bet. But UFC 240 for you. Watch
subtle,
this.
Eric. Subtle.
I wasn't subtle at all, I guess. But that's going to be on my best bets too. So speaking of best bets, let's get there. Will, I want to hear yours. You got a lot of home run bets in baseball, and just thoughts on today's games.
Well, actually, no, I mean, I don't have as many home run bets as I've been doing. I tried to dial it back a little bit and play a little safer. I was trying to play up and catch up to you guys, and that hasn't worked out for me. So we're gonna tear it down and play it safe tonight. As I talked about, I'm rolling in the Cubs Giants game. I've got Darvish going over 6.5 strikeouts for minus 106. I'm also taking the under in that game at minus 124, which is it's 7.5 runs, which between Darvish and Mad Bum, and Gary talked about how good Mad Bum has been in San Francisco. It should be a very low total game. Another strikeout prop I liked, because I didn't want to copy Garion, I decided to go against Garion's team and pick Trevor Bauer to go over 7.5 strikeouts for minus 143. That seems like, he's done that, I think like 4 of his last 6 starts. Bauer's very much a guy who will give up a couple of home runs, but he'll still strike out the guys. And, the Blue Jays are very much that kind of team where they'll strike out a bunch and they'll get some home runs. So it makes a lot of sense. Yelich, so I've got 100 on each of those. So I've got 100. My fourth $100 bet is on Christian Yelich to hit a home run, which at home, that's like almost an automatic. He's done it 3 of his last 5 games at home. He gets a righty. So he's got the lefty-righty going, plus 235. I will do that. And then I will take the very hot Josh Donaldson to homer and the Braves to win off of Danny Duffy, a lefty, another righty-lefty situation. And, he's been crushing it. He has a career home run off of Duffy. And I like the Braves to win with him, hitting the home run for plus 400. So I've got 5 $100 bets there.
Yeah, I like a lot of those, some good strikeout props. And I'm pretty convinced on this under. Maybe I do a Chicago Cubs team under with Bumgarner pitching, but I like those a lot. Garion, what are your best bets for this week?
Yeah, well, I mentioned one in the last segment, and like Will, really focused on betting Bumgarner at Oracle Park. It's been a really dominant thing going back the last 2.5 months now. So I'm enticed with how well they've been playing by the fact they are at home and they're even money to take down this game on the money line. Betting the under is probably the safer way to go, understandably, because Yu Darvish, as Will alluded to, has been very, very good his last 2 starts. But I will say for Darvish, he tends to struggle a lot more with left-handed bats than he does with right-handed bats. He's allowed fewer than a home run per 9 innings against righties this season. He's allowed almost 2.4 home runs per 9 against lefties, and there's a very good chance the Giants trot out a lineup of 7 left-handed bats tonight. They're usually among the league leaders in left-handed bats in their lineup on a per-game basis. So all that combined, I do like them at even money. So I'm going to put $100 on the Giants to win on the money line. I also like the Phillies to win on the money line against the Tigers. This is one of those classic situations where you're just getting a little bit of value on the Phillies because they're on the road, despite the fact they're on the road in Detroit, one of the worst teams in all of baseball. And I still think Matt Boyd is maybe getting a little bit too much credit. His last 6 starts, though his strikeout rate is up over 35%, which is fantastic, he's pitched to a 6.62 ERA, giving up almost 3 home runs per 9 innings, where Aaron Nola, across his past 6 starts, 1.55 ERA, 29.4% strikeout rate. Really, the only blip on the radar was his last start, but that was against the Dodgers. And I think you can kind of just toss that one out the window considering the Dodgers who they are. So Philadelphia on the money line at minus 148, $150 on that. Sometimes I'd think about maybe just doing a first 5 for that, but the Tigers bullpen is also one of the worst in all of baseball. So not too worried. I'm going to put 150 on Nola to also go over his strikeout prop at 6.5 at minus 129. Over the past 2 weeks, the Tigers' second highest strikeout rate in baseball at 28.5%. They have the highest chase rate as well at 40.7%. And Aaron Nola this season is a guy who likes to survive outside of the strike zone. So I think he matches up really well with the Tigers. I think he works deep into that game and gets over that number. And then finally, $100 on Colorado and Washington to go over 9 runs at minus 120. Feels kind of strange to bet a Rockies over when the Rockies are on the road, but you still have Peter Lambert starting this game, who is atrocious. You have Washington, who has the highest bullpen ERA of any team in the National League. And then you have Steven Strasburg, who's been phenomenal in the month of July. But it has to be pointed out and it has to be known how much he tends to struggle on or at home, He's amazing on the road. He's got a 2.26 FIP on the road. That jumps up over 4 at home because he just gives up so many home runs at Nationals Park. I think taking the over there is a really, really good bet. But again, most of the money going to kind of pool it on Philadelphia, especially considering I think the Tigers are 1-7 in the last 8 games Boyd has started. So really trending in the wrong direction for Matt Boyd and the Tigers.
Yikes. Yeah. Matt Boyd, not the best starter. He reminds me a little bit of Dylan Covey, the guy I'm about to bet against.
Not nearly that bad, but yeah.
I'm sorry to Dylan Covey and Matt Boyd for my attacks on this podcast, but I like all of those.
Add them to the list. Add them to the list.
Add them to the list. I like the Phillies. It makes a lot of sense there too. And the point you mentioned about like the Aaron Nola Dodger start, we can kind of throw it out is, yeah, exactly. He's not facing the elite batters of the Dodgers today. That doesn't really matter if he can't get out the best bats in the league. If he can get out, the lower bats at a higher rate. So I agree with throwing that out. So my best bets coming off a win last week where my only loss was Justin Rose finishing in the top 5. He was in the top 5 for a while, but at least easily beat Tiger Woods, who didn't even make the cut. So that was nice to see. I don't think it's going to be as easy this time with my 3 best bets. I'm going to go $200 actually on the over on Marlins at White Sox of 9.5. It's only minus 107. Caleb Smith is pitched well this year, but like I said, it's pretty much fool's gold at Dylan Covey, who should get rocked by a lineup that's not even good at hitting, but I think he's just going to get rocked today because he's not that good at pitching. So I think we're going to see over 9.5 runs. Pretty confident in that. $50 on what I mentioned before. It's the Californication parlay. DraftKings Sportsbook has a sometimes unique parlays that are odds boosted. This is one of them. The Giants, Dodgers, and A's. So I get the Giants that you guys mentioned, Gary, and why you like them a lot. I like my Dodgers to win basically every game because they're the best team in baseball. And I get the A's too at plus 620. So what are they going to probably all 3 teams win? Probably not. But plus 620, I'll throw $50 on that and try to clean up on a Californication odds boost parlay from DraftKings where, the real odds would not be that good. So I'll take advantage of, one of the offers that DK does. My last bet is, I know he's a big favorite, but I mentioned it a million times, Max Holloway. Put $250 on him at minus 400. My return's not going to be too great, but I really feel super strongly Holloway just, really wins this fight. If it goes to a decision, I don't really see him losing it, but I really think he can win in a knockout. So Holloway, 10 years younger, taller, better fighter. Edgar's on his way out. So $250 on Holloway to win, along with my $200 on the over on the Marlins and $50 on my Californication parlay. It's going to be another win for Eric Rosenthal here on Between the Lines. What are your guys' thoughts on everyone's bets? Will, I want to hear your thoughts on Garian's and mine.
I'm trusting you in the UFC because I know Jack, so I'm just trusting you there. Nola was actually the direction I wanted to go. Just Garian beat me to the punch, so I decided to,
It's funny though because I was debating between the Nola strikeout over and the Bauer strikeout over, so we got both of them covered for the people, so we're all good.
Yeah, I like both of them. I'm gonna get on both and go at least 1-1, hopefully 2-0 with your 2 over bets on those Ks here. But of course, the odds and lines are subject to change. See website for actual odds. And if you or someone has a gambling problem and wants help, call 1-800-GAMBLER. So any other odds that spoke out to you in the future? Is there anything in the sports world we can get to before we end the show here? I know people got a lot they want to bet on that we just gave out.
I think the Cubs and Twins division lines, that we talked about at the beginning, I think that's something worth noting.
My only advice again would just be watch the Twins if they lose those 2 games. If the Indians win those 2 games, I'm really curious to see what that line in the AL Central becomes. So I would keep track of that. Maybe not as dutifully as I'm going to, but definitely check in Thursday morning and see how that all played out.
Hey, even more dutifully, make sure you're refreshing every 5 minutes to make sure you get that Twins line. I actually like it a lot.
You could just watch the games. That would help too. You wouldn't have to refresh so much. But
don't even watch the games. Just keep refreshing. Just in case.
Just refresh.
Yeah, that's like what I did during NBA free agency, just nonstop. Remember, follow us again on Twitter at BetweenLinesDK. Listen to the show on iTunes, Spotify, everywhere else. And again, on YouTube, you can watch us, or on DK Live, you can watch us as well. For Will Appleby and Gary and Thorne, I'm Eric Rosenthal, and we just went Between the Lines.